Hello, everybody, and welcome to Untold Stories, the show in which I tell fantastical stories about my real life and then broadcast them to the world for your viewing pleasure. I'm your host, ThatKidDouglas, aka the Young Hero, and today I wanted to make a video about hype and expectations. With Avengers Age of Ultron coming out tomorrow, I can't wait for that movie. I wanted to share two particular experiences where me overhyping something ultimately led to disappointment. It's a topic that I've wanted to cover on this channel for quite some time, and I figured tonight would be the time to do exactly that. So let's get started. So we have to wind the clock back to 2007. Now, I was still in elementary school. I was in 7th grade and I was 12. Now, this particular movie, oh boy, the hype I had for it was pretty much at a fever pitch, and that of course was Spider-Man 3. Now, I don't know if you guys know this, but out of all the comic book superheroes out there, Spider-Man is my favorite. Um, and the reason I love Spider-Man, and why a lot of other people love Spider-Man, while he has powers and does, and while he has powers and he fights bad guys and does all these really awesome and badass things, he's a regular person just like us. He has struggles. He goes through things just like any other regular person does, and that's what makes him so relatable, and arguably one of the greatest comic book characters of all time. And I also really love that really old Spider-Man cartoon. I think that was from the 60s or 70s. I'm not sure. It wasn't dark and brooding like a lot of superhero-related stuff is today. It was silly. It was cartoony. It was campy, and I loved it. I would often sit in front of the TV on Saturday mornings and just watch it on Teletoon Metro. It was a great show, and if you haven't checked it out, please do. It's a fantastic series. Um, so to see the prospect of my favorite comic book superhero getting his own big screen movie, to me was just too tantalizing to resist. The first Spider-Man came out in 2002. It was great, loved it. The sequel that came out in 2004 was even better, and that's a rarity because sequels have a tendency to be inferior to the original. But still, to this day, in my opinion, Spider-Man 2 is one of the greatest comic book superhero movies ever made. It is fantastic. So my expectations for Spider-Man 3 were literally up the roof. They were extremely high. Um, and I wasn't aware at the time of the behind-the-scenes drama between Sam Raimi and Sony Pictures, but from the outside, it looked like they were crafting a masterpiece, really. Um, just the thought of having the black-suited Spider-Man, Venom, Sandman, and setting Harry up as the new Green Goblin was just too much to resist. It looked like they were crafting a masterpiece, really. It looked like it was going to be even better than Spider-Man 2, just based on everything that I'd been seeing, and we'd been inundated with trailers and promotional material for weeks. The release date, May 3rd, 2007, was embroiled into my retinas. Like, I could not stop talking about it. I was so excited to go and see the movie. I I just, oh my god, I was so hyped up for it you wouldn't believe. And that was because I'm a huge Spider-Man fan. So I went to go see it on opening weekend, the day after it came out on May 4th, 2007. And I went to go see it with my cousin Joelle, my cousin Risa, my auntie Sandra, and my mom, and we all went to go see Spider-Man 3. And me and Joelle in particular were so hyped up for it. We couldn't stop talking about it all day. We were that hyped for it. So when I actually sat down in that theater and watched it, oh, let me tell you, to say Spider-Man 3 was a letdown was an immense understatement. Now, originally, I loved it. You have to understand where I'm coming from here. I was like 12. I was a ginormous Spider-Man fan. I was a kid, and apparently not a very bright one, because I loved the film, and I couldn't understand why people were railing on it. While my family hated the film and said it wasn't Spider-Man, I just I defended for it. I stuck up for it and said this is a great film. I can't understand why people don't like it and such and such. YouTube back in 2007 was still a relatively new thing, and I'm still getting used to the concept of reviews. To say Spider-Man 3's audience reaction was mixed was an immense understatement. So while some people really loved the film, others hated it and ripped it apart, and I couldn't understand why. Although the more I actually watched the film, and the older I got, the more I started to realize how much of a mess Spider-Man 3 actually was. Not only was Spider-Man 3 one of the biggest letdowns of 2007, but arguably it's one of the biggest letdowns in cinematic history, and Sony Pictures messed up one of the greatest comic book characters of all time. You know, when you watch a classic film, it just gets better with each time you watch it. Spider-Man 3 gets worse with repeat viewings because that's when you start to notice all the mistakes and all the plot holes and just things that just don't really make sense. I mean, I'm not gonna really discuss that because it'd be beating a dead horse at this point. Tons of people have railed on Spider-Man 3 for being an incoherent mess, so I'm not going to really go into great detail. But just know, the more you watch it, the more the film just really falls apart, honestly. And Spider-Man 3 is what really started the downward spiral of Spider-Man, and that's what ended up leading to the Amazing Spider-Man franchise. Ugh, I mean, and it broke my heart for Spider-Man 4, which was supposed to come out in 2011 and was supposed to right the ships that were wronged with Spider-Man 3. But unfortunately, that got canceled after Sam Raimi and Sony couldn't come to an agreement on what the film would be. There was essentially huge creative differences, and that's ultimately what drove Sam Raimi away from the Spider-Man franchise. And Sony decided to, for some stupid reason, to reboot it, even though Spider-Man didn't need to be rebooted, and we got the Amazing Spider-Man franchise. And honestly, the less said about that franchise, the better. Thank goodness Marvel Studios came in when it did, and hopefully they'll be able to reinvigorate this character because we need a good Spider-Man film. And especially seeing all the great superhero films we've gotten over the last few years, Spider-Man is definitely deserving of a great one. Because let's be honest, Sony Pictures arguably really ruined that franchise. So hopefully Sony and Marvel teaming up will do great things for it. But I have to share some of the responsibility. While Sony arguably made a wholly mediocre film that just ruined Spider-Man as a character, I myself overhyped it because I was expecting it to be the greatest thing since sliced bread. I was expecting it to be, God's gift to the earth, and it wasn't that. And I had the complete wrong mindset going in. I was expecting it to be even better than Spider-Man 2 and be one of the greatest comic book superheroes sorry, one of the greatest comic book superhero movies of all time, and it arguably wasn't one. And I overhyped it because I was such a big Spider-Man fan, and I wanted it to be so good. And I also was in denial as well for the longest while. I didn't want it to believe that it was a mess and that it wasn't good. But I had to look into my soul and realize that it was a mess, and that me simply saying that Spider-Man 3 was a good film, even though it wasn't, would be doing a disservice to something that I love. And I just don't want to be one of those blind fanboys that said, "Oh, it's great, I don't understand why people are railing on Spider-Man 3 is awesome, da 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 da." I didn't want to be one of those people. And that was hard, but arguably I found myself better doing that than being in denial and letting my love of Spider-Man blind me from the fact that arguably it just wasn't a good film. Now don't get me wrong, Spider-Man 3 is not a bad film. There's still a lot of enjoyment to be had, but arguably it's an incoherent mess and it's woefully inferior to the first two in every way. But that's all I gotta say. Now again, I was 12 at the time. I was a kid, and I wasn't a very bright kid back then. I didn't learn my lesson because I overhyped another film that I'd been anticipating that ironically came out a few weeks after Spider-Man 3, and that was Shrek the Third. Now, I'm a ginormous Disney Pixar fan, and anybody that knows me knows this. Hell, if you watched my collaboration with Eric called Why We Love Disney Animation, I'll leave an annotation up above so you guys can watch it. You would know that. But I also have a soft spot for DreamWorks Animation, and in particular the Shrek franchise. Shrek 1 and 2, in my opinion, are two of the greatest animated films ever made. They're so fantastic, they're so charming, they're so original, they're so charming. Sorry, I think I said that twice. I could literally watch those films 100 times and never be bored with it. They're that good. And Shrek 2 in particular, when I was in elementary school, my entire class was actually invited to go see a screening of Shrek 2 at Landmark Cinemas in Whitby, Ontario, which at the time was called AMC Theaters Whitby. And I love Shrek 2. It's one of my, not just one of my favorite animated films, but overall it's one of my favorite films of all time. It is amazing. It is a great film, and honestly, I could watch it so many times and never get bored with it. It is a great film. So my expectations again for Shrek the Third were astronomically high, and I'd been inundated with promotional material about it for weeks. And the release date, May 26, 2007, was burned into my retinas. I couldn't wait. I was eagerly anticipating for it. Sorry, I was eagerly anticipating it, and my hype was over 9,000. It was through the moon. I could not wait to go see this movie. And I went to go see it with my mom shortly after release. And let me tell you, unlike Spider-Man 3, where I initially loved it and I couldn't understand why people hated it so much, with Shrek the Third, I've never been more disappointed with something in my adolescent life, let me tell you. Something about it just didn't feel right. It just didn't feel like a Shrek movie to me. Now, don't get me wrong. Like, look, I respect Justin Timberlake as an entertainer. I like the guy. I think he's great, but arguably he was terribly miscast as Arthur, and ultimately I found him to be a very boring and bland character, and ultimately I really didn't care whether or not he became kin of Far, Far Away. I didn't care. The whole damsel in distress subplot ultimately went nowhere. And while it was cool to see these princesses that we have known from fairy tales for years upon years actually fighting back and being badasses was cool, ultimately it went nowhere. The whole Fiona is pregnant subplot, that went nowhere really. The whole, the kin of Far, Far Away dying went nowhere. Oh my god, that's what pissed me off the most, was the kin of Far, Far Away. Spoiler alert, he dies at the beginning of Shrek the Third. And I was beginning to warm up to him. Because he was turned into a frog at the end of Shrek 2. He warmed up to Shrek. He realized he'd accepted the fact that Fiona was an ogre and that she was in love with Shrek, and was warming up to that prospect, only to get turned into a frog by Mother Charming at the end of Shrek 2. And then he dies at the beginning of the Shrek the Third. And he dies so pointlessly, they don't even give a reason for it. He just essentially dies of natural causes. They never explain it. He just dies because of reasons. And also, the jokes didn't feel as fresh as they did for the first two films. It ultimately felt that DreamWorks was honestly just phoning it in for the third installment, to be honest with you. It's just like they were like, oh, Shrek, oh, yeah, people will go see anything with Shrek's name on it. It doesn't have to be, quality. It doesn't matter if it's mediocre or shoehorned or less than, good. If it has a Shrek name on it, anyone will go see. Everybody will go see it. It doesn't matter. It doesn't even have to be good. Anyone will go see anything with Shrek on it. And that was kind of partly right, since Shrek was such an established brand name at that point. They felt, anyone would go see anything with the Shrek name attached to it. And while the movie still made a lot of money, it was a ginormous hit. A lot of fans were disappointed with it, myself included. Because arguably, compared to the first two, it was woefully inferior, and it's arguably the weakest out of the entire Shrek franchise. And and while I found Forever After was good, it was certainly better than the third one, it couldn't hold a candle to the first two films. But that was the only reason I liked Forever After is because my expectations were significantly lowered, because I was burned with Shrek the Third, because it soured me on the Shrek franchise. And honestly, if you ever want the text point example on how to ruin a franchise, just go watch Shrek the Third and you know what I'm talking about. But arguably, again, I overhyped it. I felt it was going to be the greatest thing, like ever. I thought it was going to be like the greatest animated film of all time, like a Toy Story 3 level film, and it just wasn't that. And again, I let my hype and let my love of something get out of control to the point where, the final film could in no way have lived up to all those lofty, expectations that I had for it. And ultimately, I found myself disappointed with it, to be fair. And I blame myself for doing that. And I learned a valuable lesson, really, was to not overhype things. And I feel like that's an important thing that I want to address here. Is that don't overhype something. It's okay to be excited for something and have a love for a particular brand or property or whatever. That's fine. But if you overhype something, if you have astronomical and unrealistic expectations, you're only going to set yourself up for disappointment, because the final product of whatever it is you're hyping can in no way live up to everything that you hope for. You know, it's not going to be God's gift to the earth. It's not going to be the greatest thing ever. And if you go in with that expectations, you're going to be disappointed. You know, but if you lower your expectations, or if you keep them at a reasonable level, you might find yourself surprised, you know? That, you know, and time again, I see people overhyping things in entertainment, only to find themselves disappointed, whether that be video games, movie, or TV. And just like people don't seem to learn this. But arguably, really, you know, like, again, just don't overhype things, keep it at a reasonable level, and you won't be disappointed. I mean, granted, I'm excited for Avengers Age of Ultron. I think it's going to be really good, but it's not through the roof where I'm having all these unrealistic expectations. I'm expecting that it'll be a great film, and nothing more than that. But really, that's all I got to say on this particular topic. I'm really passionate about it, and I want to get a discussion going. Have you ever been hyping something, whether that be a video game, a movie, or a TV show, and you hyped it up so much that you just left yourself disappointed? Have you guys ever done that? If so, leave a comment in the description down below. Anyways, that's all I gotta say on this particular topic. This is ThatKidDouglas, aka the Unhero, signing out. Deuces. Stay frosty and keep it weird. Cue the random explosion. What's up?